Did you know that in 2018, a construction crew in San Francisco's Mission District demolished a wall in a Victorian home and discovered 13 children's shoes arranged in a perfect circle around a letter written in 1904 that contained instructions for a ritual to bind a child's spirit to the house forever, and that every family who had lived in that house since 1904 had reported their children developing imaginary friends who aged backwards, growing younger each year until they vanished completely, taking the real children's memories of their own childhoods with them? This is the story of the House of Stolen Childhoods at 1847 Valencia Street, a three-story Victorian that has stood for over 120 years in one of San Francisco's oldest neighborhoods, and of the horrifying discovery that some homes don't just contain ghosts. They contain traps, carefully constructed prisons designed to harvest something far more precious than life itself, something that can only be taken from the innocent, from those who still remember what it's like to exist in that magical space between imagination and reality, that brief window of childhood, before the world teaches you to stop believing in things you can't see. The Martinez Construction Company had been hired in March 2018 to renovate the Victorian house that had been purchased by a tech entrepreneur named David Chen, who planned to convert it into a modern smart home while preserving its historical facade. The house had been empty for 3 years following the death of its previous owner, an elderly woman named Margaret Holloway, who had lived there alone for over 40 years, and who had died under circumstances that were officially ruled as accidental. But that neighbors whispered were something far stranger. She had been found at the bottom of the basement stairs, her body positioned as if she'd been running from something, her face frozen in an expression of terror, and clutched in her hand was a child's toy from the 1920s that shouldn't have existed in that house because Margaret had never had children and had never allowed children to visit. The construction crew, led by foreman Carlos Martinez, began the renovation work by systematically examining the structure, checking for damage, updating electrical and plumbing systems, and in the process, opening up walls that had been sealed for decades. On April 12, 2018, while working on the second floor, they removed a section of wall between 2 bedrooms and discovered something that made Carlos immediately call the police. A hidden cavity approximately 4 feet wide, and arranged within it were 13 children's shoes, all different sizes ranging from toddler to early teen, all different styles spanning from the early 1900s to the 1990s, all arranged in a perfect circle around a yellowed envelope. The police arrived, initially treating it as a potential crime scene. Multiple children's shoes hidden in a wall suggested something sinister, possibly evidence of abductions or worse. But forensic analysis revealed no biological material, no blood, no indication that the shoes had been taken from crime scenes. They were just shoes carefully preserved, deliberately arranged, surrounding an envelope that contained a letter dated October 31st, 1904, written in elegant Victorian script on paper that had somehow remained remarkably intact despite being sealed in a wall for over a century. The letter was addressed to future residents of this house and was signed by someone named Constance Ashford, who identified herself as the original owner's daughter, Detective Sarah Lynn, who was assigned to investigate the discovery, had the letter examined by historians and handwriting experts who confirmed it was genuine, dating to the early 1900s, and written by a woman who, according to property records, had indeed lived in the house with her parents from 1898 until her death in 1936. But what the letter contained was far more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. Detective Lynn released portions of it to the public, though some sections remained sealed by court order due to concerns about their content. The released portions read, "To those who will inhabit this house after I am gone, I write this as both confession and warning. In 1904, my daughter Lily died of scarlet fever at the age of 7. She was my only child, my entire world, and her death destroyed me in ways that made continuing to live feel impossible. In my grief, I sought out a woman in Chinatown who was known among certain circles as someone who understood the boundaries between life and death. who knew rituals that could bring back what had been lost. She told me that death was permanent, that my Lily could not be returned to me, but that there were other ways to keep a child forever, to ensure that I would never lose another child to death or time. She taught me a ritual, one that required objects of innocence arranged in sacred geometry, words spoken at the threshold between one day and the next, and a binding that would make this house a place where childhood itself could be captured and preserved. I performed the ritual on October 31st, 1904, at midnight, using objects that had belonged to Lily and other children in the neighborhood, and I felt something change in the house that night, felt it become aware in a way that architecture should never be aware. The ritual worked, though not as I had hoped. My daughter did not return, but the house became capable of creating what I can only describe as echo children, manifestations that appear to young children who live here, imaginary friends that seem perfectly normal at first, but that possess an unusual quality. They age backwards. A child who meets their echo friend at age 7 will watch that friend slowly become 6, then 5, then 4, growing younger as the real child grows older. And when the echo child finally fades away at age 0, vanishing into non-existence, they take something with them, the real child's memories of their own childhood, leaving them with an inexplicable amnesia about their early years, as if they had never truly experienced that time themselves. I came to understand too late that the echo children are not my Lily returning, but something else, something that feeds on childhood itself, using the ritual I performed to create a permanent feeding mechanism. This house traps the essence of childhood and consumes it, stealing innocence from generation after generation of children who live within its walls. I have tried to undo the ritual, tried to cleanse the house, but the binding is permanent. The house has become something that cannot be unmade, only abandoned. I have sealed this letter and the objects of the original ritual in a wall, hidden from future residents because I am too much a coward to warn people openly, too afraid of being called mad or evil. But if you have found this, if you have children or plan to have children, you must not let them live in this house. The echo children will come for them, will befriend them, will steal their childhoods while wearing the faces of perfect playmates. And once the theft is complete, those children will grow into adults who feel like they're missing something fundamental. Like a piece of their soul was taken before they were old enough to understand what they had lost. The letter's discovery created immediate media attention, though most coverage treated it as a historical curiosity, an example of Victorian-era superstition and a grief-stricken mother's descent into delusion. But Detective Lynn, working with historians and previous residents of the house, began uncovering a pattern that was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Every family with children who had lived in the house since 1904 had reported the same phenomenon. Their children developed imaginary friends who seemed unusually vivid and persistent. Friends that the children insisted were real, that they could describe in perfect detail, and that they claimed were growing younger over time. Parents had documented this in diaries, letters, and more recently, in online parenting forums where they'd sought advice about their children's unusually intense imaginary friendships. And in every case, as the imaginary friend aged down to infancy and then disappeared, the real child developed complete amnesia about their early childhood, unable to remember anything before the age at which the imaginary friend vanished. A child who met their echo friend at age 6 and watched them disappear when the echo reached 0, would suddenly have no memories of ages 0 through 6, no memory of first steps, first words, early birthdays, or anything from those years. The memories were gone, not suppressed or forgotten, but simply absent, as if they had been surgically removed or had never formed in the first place. Detective Lynn interviewed now adult former residents of the house, people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, all the way up to elderly individuals who had lived there as children in the 1920s and 30s. Every single one who had been under age 12 when they lived in the house reported the same amnesia, the same sense of missing childhood memories, the same vague recollection of an imaginary friend who had been very real and who had gone away at some point. One former resident, a 76-year-old woman named Patricia Brennan, who had lived in the house from 1946 to 1949, told Detective Lynn something particularly disturbing. "I don't remember anything before age 8. My parents used to tell me stories about what I was like as a toddler, about my first words and my first day of kindergarten. But those stories felt like they were about someone else, like they were describing a different child. And I had a friend when we lived in that house, a little girl I called Emma who played with me every day. My mother took photographs of me playing alone during that time. But I swear I wasn't alone. Emma was there, I could see her, I could touch her. But my mother only ever saw me playing by myself, and Emma got younger. I remember that clearly because it seemed so strange. We met when we were both about 7, but over the 3 years we lived there, she became 6, then 5, then 4, getting smaller and younger while I got bigger and older. The day we moved out of that house, I went to say goodbye to Emma, and she was just a baby, couldn't even talk anymore. I picked her up to hug her, and she just disappeared, vanished right out of my arms. And at that moment, I forgot everything about being a baby and toddler myself. Like her vanishing took all those memories with her. David Chen, the new owner who had commissioned the renovation, initially dismissed the letter and the testimonies as elaborate hoaxes or mass delusion. He continued with the renovation plans, refusing to be deterred by what he called Victorian ghost stories and psychological suggestion. But his contractor, Carlos Martinez, refused to continue working on the house after the discovery, and finding a replacement crew proved nearly impossible. Word had spread in the construction community about the hidden cavity and the letter, and no one wanted to work on what was being called the child-stealing house. Chen finally found a crew willing to work on the property in June 2018, and the renovation was completed by September. He moved in with his wife Elizabeth and their 5-year-old daughter Sophie, determined to prove that the house was just a house, that the stories were superstition, that rational people in the 21st century shouldn't be swayed by century-old letters and anecdotal reports of imaginary friends. Sophie developed an imaginary friend within 2 weeks of moving in. She called her Lily, the same name as Constance Ashford's dead daughter from the original letter. Sophie described Lily as 7 years old, with long dark hair and old-fashioned clothes, and she insisted that Lily lived in the walls, that she had been waiting for a long time for a new friend, that she was lonely because she'd been alone in the house for 3 years since the last children left. David and Elizabeth tried to be supportive, treating Lily as a normal imaginary friend, a sign that Sophie was adjusting to the new house and processing the move through creative play. But Sophie's descriptions of Lily were unsettlingly detailed and consistent, and she began saying things that neither parent had told her. Things about the house's history, about previous families who had lived there, about a lady named Constance who had made Lily special so she could stay forever. 3 months after moving in, David walked into Sophie's room and found his daughter having a conversation with empty air, gesturing and laughing as if someone was there. But what made him freeze in horror was what Sophie was saying. "Don't be sad that you're getting smaller, Lily. When you're a baby again, you get to be new, and I get to keep what you give me. Mommy says memories are precious. You're giving me your memories, right? That's what we're trading?" David immediately pulled Sophie from the room and demanded to know what she meant. Sophie looked confused by his reaction. "Lily explained it to me. She gets younger and I get her memories of being young. It's like a trade. I'll have memories of being a child twice, my own and hers. Isn't that good? Isn't that what the house is for?" Elizabeth, a psychologist by training, recognized the description as concerning. Sophie seemed to believe she was gaining memories rather than understanding she would be losing them, as if the house or the echo child was framing the theft as a gift, making the victim complicit in their own victimization. They consulted with child psychologists, with paranormal investigators, with anyone who might help them understand what was happening. The consensus was disturbing. Whether through genuine supernatural means or through some kind of psychological phenomenon embedded in the house's history and architecture, children who lived there developed dissociative relationships with imaginary friends that resulted in documented childhood amnesia. The mechanism didn't matter. The effect was real and consistent across over a century of residence. The Chen family moved out in January 2019, after only 4 months in the house. Sophie's imaginary friend Lily had aged from 7 to approximately 6 during that time, and Sophie was already showing signs of memory degradation. She couldn't remember her 4th birthday party, couldn't recall the name of her preschool teacher, was losing the most recent memories first, as if the echo child was consuming her childhood in reverse chronological order. The house has remained empty since then. David Chen tried to sell it, but disclosing the history made it legally impossible to find buyers, and not disclosing it opened him to lawsuits. The property has become a legal and ethical nightmare, a house that everyone agrees is somehow dangerous to children, but that no one can prove is dangerous in any way that would justify condemnation or demolition. Paranormal researchers have investigated extensively, and while they can't prove supernatural activity, they have documented unusual phenomena. Temperature fluctuations in the second-floor bedrooms where the shoes were found. EVP recordings that seem to contain children's voices counting backwards from 10 to 0. And most disturbing, photographs taken in the house that sometimes show small handprints on walls that weren't visible during the photography session, but appear in the developed images. A theoretical physicist from Berkeley named Dr. James Wong has proposed a hypothesis that sounds like science fiction, but that he insists could explain the phenomenon scientifically. If Constance Ashford performed a ritual in 1904 that she believed would trap childhood, and if her belief was accompanied by unusual electromagnetic or quantum conditions, perhaps during a specific astronomical configuration, or in the presence of unusual geological features, it's theoretically possible that she created what we might call an information loop in the house's structure. Not a ghost in the traditional sense, but a kind of quantum recording that continuously plays back and interacts with new residents, especially children whose neurology is still developing and whose sense of self is more fluid. The echo children might be information constructs, not spirits, but the effect on real children's memory formation would be the same. The house's information loop somehow interferes with how childhood memories are encoded, causing them to degrade or transfer to the construct, instead of being properly stored in the child's neurology. Whether Dr. Wong's hypothesis or the supernatural explanation is correct, the practical effect is undeniable. Children who live in the house lose their childhood memories, and that loss is preceded by relationships with imaginary friends, who age backwards and who seem to be aware of the theft they're committing. The 13 shoes that were found in the wall have been sent to various research institutions for study. DNA testing found no biological material, but isotope analysis dated them accurately to their respective time periods, spanning from approximately 1900 to 1995. The arrangement of the shoes in a perfect circle, and the fact that they represent 13 different children across nearly a century, suggests that each shoe marks a successful harvest of childhood, a trophy or component of the ritual's continued operation. The most disturbing recent development came in October 2023, when Detective Lin received an email from an anonymous sender containing a photograph. The image showed the interior of the house's second floor, specifically the wall where the shoes had been hidden. But in the photograph, which appeared to have been taken recently based on the visible renovation work, there were 14 shoes arranged in the circle, not 13. A 14th shoe had apparently been added. A small pink sneaker with Velcro straps, the kind a 5-year-old might wear, exactly like the shoes Sophie Chen had been wearing when her family lived in the house. Detective Lin and a team entered the house legally with David Chen's permission to investigate. They opened the wall cavity where the shoes had been found. It was empty. The original 13 shoes were in evidence lockers and research facilities. There was no 14th shoe, no pink sneaker, nothing but empty space and old wooden framing. But when Detective Lin reviewed security camera footage from the house, Chen had installed cameras before moving out, hoping to document any unusual activity. The footage from the night the email was sent showed something impossible. At exactly midnight, A small figure appeared in the second-floor hallway, visible only as a vague distortion in the air, like heat shimmer or water vapor forming a child-shaped outline. The figure moved to the wall where the cavity had been, and where the outline touched the wall, a faint glow appeared, and for approximately 30 seconds, the wall became translucent, revealing the hidden cavity behind it, and inside the cavity, clearly visible, were 14 shoes arranged in a circle. The footage captured one more detail before the wall became solid again. Inside the circle of shoes, where the letter from Constance Ashford had been found, there was now a new letter written in a child's handwriting that read, "My name was Sophie. I had a friend named Lily who lived in the walls. She took me to where the young children go. It's nice here. We don't get old. We don't remember being old. We just play forever in the time before time. If you have children, bring them here. We're lonely. We're always lonely. We need more friends who don't count up, who count down with us, who understand that growing old is the real theft, not what we take. We're saving them from time. Why won't anyone understand?" The letter vanished when the wall became solid again, visible only in that brief 30-second window of translucence, documented only by the security footage that Detective Lynn has watched hundreds of times, trying to determine if it's real documentation of supernatural activity or an elaborate hoax using video editing technology. Sophie Chen, now 7 years old, lives in a different house with her parents, and she has no memory of anything before her 6th birthday. She doesn't remember living in the Valencia Street house, doesn't remember an imaginary friend named Lily, doesn't remember the first 5 years of her life at all. Medical examination shows no neurological damage, no physical cause for the amnesia. The memories are simply gone, as if they never existed, or as if they're being stored somewhere else, in some space where childhood persists outside of time, a place where children who count backwards can play forever, never growing old, never dying, but also never becoming anything more than what they are in that eternal moment of youth. The house at 1847 Valencia Street remains empty, its windows dark, its Victorian facade slowly deteriorating without maintenance. The city has declared it a historical landmark, which paradoxically protects it from demolition while making it nearly impossible to renovate or occupy. It stands as a monument to a mother's grief that transformed into something monstrous, a reminder that love, when twisted by loss and desperation, can create prisons disguised as eternal playgrounds. And sometimes, neighbors report, late at night when the fog rolls in from the bay and makes the streetlights look like distant moons, you can hear children's laughter coming from inside the empty house, the sound of young voices counting backwards from 10 to 0, over and over. An endless descent from the beginning of childhood towards something that isn't birth but isn't quite death either. Just an absence. A place where memories go when they're stolen, where childhood goes when it's prevented from becoming adulthood, where time runs backwards and innocence is preserved forever, at the cost of everything that makes growing up worth enduring. So here's the question that keeps child psychologists, quantum physicists, and paranormal researchers awake at night. The question that Constance Ashford is century-old ritual poses but can never safely answer. What if childhood memories aren't stored only in our brains, but exist in some kind of collective field that certain locations can access and trap? What if rituals performed with sufficient belief and emotional intensity can create persistent patterns in reality, information loops that continue operating long after their creators are dead? What if every child who has ever lived in that house has had their early years stolen not by ghosts, but by some kind of temporal information construct that was created in 1904, and that will continue harvesting childhoods until the house itself is destroyed? And most terrifying, what if Sophie Chen's letter is real? What if the children who count backwards have become something that exists outside normal time and space? And what if they genuinely believe they're saving other children by taking them to a place where aging is reversed and time runs backwards, creating an ever-growing population of stolen childhoods that exists in some pocket dimension anchored to a Victorian house in San Francisco, forever playing, forever young, forever trapped in the moment before memory becomes permanent, and forever, desperately, terribly lonely.